Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by sharedserviceslink and in association with ESCA. Today we're looking at 5 steps to world-class accounts payable. My name is Susie West, and I'm the founder and CEO at sharedserviceslink, and it's an honor to be working again with Julie May. I've been working with Julie over the last number of years, and it's always been a pleasure, so it's great to be working with Julie again. Julie is the Business Development Manager at ESCA and has huge experience within the area of accounts payable and also other kind of financial transactional areas too. So it's great to have her expertise on this webinar today. You do, of course, have a role to play insofar as what you get out of the next 60 minutes, which is to make sure that you get your questions answered. If for any reason you feel like your questions aren't being answered, do send those through to me nice and early. I do have a habit of asking the presenters the questions on a first-come, first-served basis. So you can wait right till the end of the webinar, but I strongly recommend you to post me your questions as early as you can. If it's obvious that the answer has been established throughout the course of the webinar, I won't put it to the speaker. Let's have a look at the agenda for the next 60 minutes. I'm going to be touching on the context for today, and then Julie is going to be looking at the 5 steps that can genuinely take you to world-class accounts payable. She's then going to be talking about some case studies that I'm very confident that you can take a great practical example from. And then we'll be touching on your questions and answers in the last 10 minutes of this webinar. So looking at the context for today's webinar, many shared services organizations globally. We believe there are probably about 7, possibly 8,000, but certainly 7,000 shared services organizations globally. And they all, on an average, have about 3 shared services centers. So that's about 21,000 shared services centers globally. And 90-odd% of them are managing the accounts payable process. That's a lot of accounts payable kind of functions across the world, and the majority of them, because they are a shared services organization, and shared services is indeed about process improvement, continuous improvement, and always trying to find good and innovative ways of being effective and more efficient. They are on this ongoing quest for world-class performance, and as most of us know, world-class performance, it does have a habit of changing every year. The goalposts do seem to be moving every year because a lot of these 7,000 shared services organizations are indeed getting better at a quicker pace than others. And what that means is that they are raising the bar. So this is looking into the ways in which some of those world-class organizations are being able to accelerate at a quicker pace than the rest of the other shared services organizations, and you'll be finding out what they're doing and maybe what they're not doing to help them on that journey. So I would like to introduce more formally Julie May, Business Development Manager at ESCA, who's going to be talking about the 5 steps to world-class accounts payable. Over to you, please, Julie.
Thank you, Susie. It's great to be here. And like Susie had said, we're going to talk about the 5 steps to world-class accounts payable processing. And with that, I want to just go ahead and give myself just a brief introduction. As she had mentioned, I've been with ESCA for about 8.5 years now. But prior to that, I had about 20 years of experience working with companies in just different facets of automation. And people think I'm crazy because it's almost a hobby of mine. That's what I actually read about at night by the bedstand. So really enjoy getting into these processes related to order to cash and procure to pay. And specifically as we talk about clients that are moving to shared services or looking at shared service organizations and how to make those processes be the best for their organization to deliver the best stakeholder values. So as we kind of start to jump into the meeting itself, this lovely picture here is one where I'm always looking at it going, oh, I'm sure people are excited about another webinar, and it makes it a little bit nerve-wracking to host one because it seems like a lot of companies out there are putting on webinars about how to automate your different processes and fill your life with rainbows and unicorns of how wonderful the world's going to be, and sometimes you feel like you're talking to an audience who has maybe heard a lot of this already before. So I'm very realistic about knowing that there's a number of different reasons that people attend these webinars, and one of them is that they're looking for primarily being able to achieve those continuing education credits, and we're happy to provide that to people. Along with that, my personal goal is to actually have a presentation that will spark a thought or an action that might help you as you proceed through your days. So having said that, I'm kind of set this webinar up, and when we were working, we were looking to not make it be a typical webinar regarding AP automation. Instead, we're going to focus on the steps that are taken kind of as an organization to become a world-class AP organization, more so than what an AP process of automation looks like. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Susie for the first poll question here.
That's great. Thank you, Julie. So coming up on your screen now is the first poll question for the day. This should be kind of multiple choice, so if more of the options apply to you, please tick more than one option. What is your motivation for joining the webinar today? Is it to see what other companies are doing within accounts payable automation? Is it because your processes are currently, managing your processes is currently like treading water and your volume is growing, and maybe you're feeling kind of that horrible sinking feeling, or that sinking feeling is not too far away? Perhaps you're trying to build a business case so that you can consider accounts payable automation, or perhaps you need education credits, and this is fulfilling that need. So we're at 74% of us having voted. If you haven't already cast your vote, please do so. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, results coming up on your screen now. 77% of you responded there. So there is a clear winner. 94% of you said to see what other companies are doing insofar as what they're doing in accounts payable automation, followed in a poor-ish second place at 21% of you, 21% of you trying to build a case so that you can consider accounts payable automation perhaps for the first time, it would perhaps seem. And then in joint third place, we've got at 9% those of you saying that your processes are feeling like treading water, and those of you that say that you're looking to build up some credits. So interesting results. Back to you, please, Julie.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks for your help on just kind of giving me the lay of the land there. It's always helpful to understand kind of the motivation for people that are joining the webinar, and if you are here for the continuing education credits, that's completely fine. We're happy to help out and hopefully give you some good ideas to take back. And for those that are looking to see what others are doing, we'll have a couple case studies at the end, but this is really also the process that we help clients work through a lot of times as they're looking to make improvements to their account payables process, and it can even be the larger procure-to-pay process at times. So when we're talking about those steps, the 5 steps that we're talking about is really taking a good look at where you are now, being able to, secondly, align those goals of your department along with the higher level corporate goals that your organization may have. The third thing is taking a look within your organization to see, how and who are the groups that are getting things done. How are people getting projects approved, and how are people, getting a committee together that can actually come up with a decision to say go. And sometimes that's the biggest hurdle we run into within decision-making groups. The fourth thing is that once you do have a project underway, how do you make the most of that project to get the best value out of it? And then 5, once you have something that's been put in place, how do you set yourself up to have even further improvement within your organization once that project has been implemented? Following those steps, we'll go ahead and look at a success story and then the wrap up with the question and answers like Susie had mentioned. So we'll start talking about that first item, and that's really looking at where you are now. And when we're talking about where you are now, there's two different components to it, and a lot of times we see a lot of time and effort being put into this first one, and that's the basic statistics around your current process. And this has to do with the number of staff that's involved in your AP process, the invoice quantity and breakout between your PO and non-PO invoices, your receipt of invoices, how they're coming in versus, are they postal mail, fax, email, EDI, other file types, cycle times, and all those other statistics that you talk about around the process to try to get a feel for where you are kind of from a proficiency standpoint and from a processing standpoint. The second point when we talk about where are you now is looking at it from a strategic standpoint and having strategic discussions on how the current state is functioning and how that compares to your larger company goals. And is the team that's involved with this improving supplier relationships? Are you able to capture and process focusing on assisting the organization with increasing your margin specifically, or looking at capturing additional discounts? Is there coordination with larger finance goals to unlock working capital? Do you have a supply chain finance program in place? And these are the strategic discussions that take place that really do involve what's happening in the AP department, and it's important to think about where you are now in being able to assist with some of those, as well as looking at those statistics. In coordination with that, we also start to look at what a common invoice process looks like for some companies. And the one on the right is obviously quite busy and a lot of red arrows going different places. And this one actually isn't even the worst of what we've seen, but it can make you feel like you're just climbing piles of paper. Still have a primarily paper-based focus within your organization. And I'm always surprised to see how many organizations still do the majority of their work in a paper-based world. Even in very large shared service centers, we still see it from time to time. And as you start to look at those things, the things that you look at when you're trying to capture those basic statistics about that process that you have are looking at not just a lot of those items that we talked about on the first slide as far as kind of the statistics around them, but you need to look at it from a larger perspective, going back to that purchase requisition process. Also, how are your invoices right now having any data captured? Being able to look at automating your matching or being able to have an approval workflow that might be put in place. Discrepancy handling is something that commonly is, kind of process that's outside the process, and how are you handling that? Real-time visibility, long-term archive. What does it take for you to support your tax and audit structure that's in line, with the requirements when those auditors come in? What are they asking you to get? So as you're looking to capture kind of what your current process is and how much it's costing you as an organization, it's important to take all of these things into consideration with those total costs that you're breaking out. And one of the things that we're about to ask has to do with that. So with that, we'll go ahead and pass it back for poll question number 2.
That's great. Thank you, Julie. So let's find out about how much you estimate it costs for your organization to process an average invoice. So you'll probably have a real blend of electronic PO, electronic non-PO. It might be a bit of EDI in there. It might be some OCR, PO, OCR, non-PO, and then manual PO, manual non-PO. So looking at the kind of the blended cost of how much it is to process an invoice in your organization, what do you think you're really looking at as an average? Is it $25 to $40 per invoice or a little bit more? $10 to $24 per invoice, $5 to $9 per invoice, $1 to $4 per invoice, or are you not quite so sure at this stage? So closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at those results. Thank you very much. 80% of you responded to that, which is great. Coming up on your screen now, it's a bit of a bell curve, which you kind of expect to a question like this. With 28%, so the largest group representation on the line today, coming in at an average cost, but somewhere between $10 to $24. at 25% of you talking about $5 to $9, 18% of you saying $1 to $4, 15% of you saying somewhere between $25 and $40, 15% of you saying you're unsure. I'm going to keep this poll response open for a little bit because I'm sure that Julie's got some comments to make on some of these stats before she goes on to the rest of her material.
Yes, thanks. It's always interesting because from one webinar to the next, we see these numbers fluctuate around sometimes quite a bit, and having the discussion about what you're taking into consideration when you're estimating these costs is something that is usually a larger discussion when we start to get into it with organizations. Interestingly enough, the 15% that are unsure, sometimes it's interesting that people are willing to put that out there because of the fact that so often when you start getting into what is it really costing you to process, it's a bigger discussion to understand really what is all being put into those numbers to see if it's a really good, true cost that is the end result of those discussions. So I think that's something that comes to play quite a bit as we look at that next slide that we had there for the discussion here, and that's just looking at, where are you now in the range of what we found when we looked at the report that PayStream Advisors put together, and it was just last year that the average price per invoice for processing in an organization that has a low level of automation is actually about $40.70. And I was surprised because it seemed like it was a very high number to me. And though sometimes it's the case that that organization that's putting those numbers together has actually done the most work to find out really what's all involved in some of those processes. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a dramatically different number, and that's $2.94. And those best-in-class organizations that have really put time and effort into converting work over to electronic means where possible and having automated processes in there for workflow, as well as archiving and looking at options to be able to have other sorts of automation in place and sometimes even compress the approval process, have been able to shrink that number down to $2.94. So there's a dramatic shift as you go from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, and obviously you'd rather be over on the right side of the screen if you're able to show the organization those sorts of efficiencies. So as you think about that, one thing that we know is that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And we talk about the priorities that organizations have as they're looking at making changes from year to year, but we often hear from organizations, especially when we're seeing them and talking to them, and maybe at a trade show year after year, or maybe they're showing up at webinars year after year, that their projects are being put on hold, and it's happened for this year and then the year before that and the year before that. So as you start to think about it, and you start to think about those huge differences in cost swings that you can see when you put automation in place, what are the things that can be done, and where can that process go where you're trying to make some changes? So in order to get a roadmap as to where people are right now that are in the group that are participating, we're going to go ahead with our third poll question. And go ahead, Susie.
That's great. So yes, coming up on your screen now. Where do you see your organization on the path to automation for AP? For your AP process. So is it high? And what we mean by high is that you have significant use of imaging or electronic invoicing, a good, strong, solid, robust automated workflow with very sophisticated rules built into it. You're near paperless, you've got a good travel and entertainment process going on, you're using ACH payments, use of cards, etc. Or is it medium, which is you've got some use of scanning and filing but no true automation prior to posting, you still have a good deal of manual paper-based processing going on? Or is it indeed low, which is if you have mostly a manual paper processing environment? So please tell us which applies to you the most. Let's close that poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results now. 68% of you responded, so coming up on your screen now. So 44% of you see yourself as having a high representation, so that's very positive, and followed by 36% of you talking about medium and 19% of you low. So back to you, please, Julie.
Great. Thanks so much. And I've got to say that number with the high percentage is one of the highest numbers of people that have rated themselves on the high end in, I think, my history of doing these type of discussions and webinars and asking that question. So it's good to see that people are starting to get some of their projects approved and underway. This slide itself here is talking about kind of where we see things in the world of, shared service centers and AP organizations across the board. And the level of high automated groups that we typically see is more in the 22.8% group. The medium is around the 48.5, and then the low is 28.7. So I think our representation here on the call is skewing a little bit more towards the high side, which makes sense from the standpoint of that these are the groups that are looking to automate and improve their functions from a shared services standpoint, and that's probably part of the reason that you're participating in the webinar today as well. So as you're looking at that, even the ones that are in the high percentage group probably have some areas that you're focusing on from an organizational standpoint to be able to improve your processes. And the second thing in those 5 steps that we talk about is after you have kind of the lay of the land and you know where you are, secondly, we look at what is the lay of the components of goals for your corporation as a higher level. And these are themes that we see that typically run through any sort of investor presentations or your annual reports that are published. And a lot of the themes that we see out there are quite similar from one organization to another, in that they have to do with removing costs at every level, being able to focus on improving the customer experience. I think the other day we heard somebody talking about how that they want their customer experience, to be a wow factor when people call in, and that's not just for orders that are being processed through your customer service group. That's also for invoices being processed through the AP team, because the customer in that instance is kind of the vendor, and you want to have the best supplier relationships as possible with them. Next, talking about silos that are in your business and how do you remove those. Also being able to grow your sales and increase the market share. And finally, one thing that's on people's minds quite a bit from the corporate standpoint is how do you mitigate risk, and how do you try to make that as small of a process as need be, meaning that you're as secure and that you've managed everything from a processes standpoint, but that you're also doing it at the best cost possible for your organization. So as you look at those things, what we'll do is we'll move into this next step, which is looking at the drivers of automation that we typically hear from accounts payable professionals and groups on the right-hand side of the screen, and aligning those things with the organizational goals from the higher level. And as you see, as the arrows light up, those organizational goals on the left-hand side align quite nicely with any number of the drivers for automation on the right-hand side. And what we found is that if you're able to take those goals, and usually within your corporation, we hear that 1 or 2 of these type of things is really the primary focus for any given fiscal year. We've seen companies and shared service leaders that have been able to really take these drivers for automation and align them directly with these high-level organizational goals and focus in that area to make the business case as you're working through it for approval. And success seems to be a much higher frequency when you can do those things and work skillfully with the leaders of your organization to help ensure that everybody's on the same page. And as you're looking at those things, a lot of them come in line with, how long does it take an invoice to go from approval, from receipt to approval? And that is going to be our next poll question. I'm going to hand over to Susie here in just a second as to how those things align so that we can then work towards the next step and talk a little bit more about those higher level corporate goals in just a minute. Susie?
Great. Coming up on your screen now, let's have a look at this poll question. So, how long does it take to process an invoice through to approval for payment? So, how long does it take to process an invoice through to approval for payment? So, you've received it in your organization day one. How many days does it take to get that invoice through to approval for payment? Is it 1 to 4 days, 4 to 10 days, 10 to 15 days, 15 to 25 days, or is it more than 25 days as an average to process an invoice through to approval for payment? We're closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, coming up on your screen now, 68% of you responded to that. Let's have a look at the results. So 36% of you say it takes somewhere between 4 and 10 days to move an invoice through to the position of being ready for payment, approved for payment, followed in second place by 28% of you. At the top of the chart, where it takes you between 1 and 4 days. Then third place, 17% of you talking about 10 to 15 days, 11% of you it's in excess of 25 days, and 8% of you talking about 15 to 25 days. Back to you, please, Julie.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, it's nice to see that number in the 1 to 4 day category being as high as the 28%, because that's probably aligning quite nicely, I would guess, with the 44% that had the high level of automation in their process. As we look at kind of the KPI times that we see across the board a lot of times, and we're looking at market average for processing an invoice, we tend to see 11.4 days being the average, and best-in-class organizations having that down around the 3.6 days in order to process an invoice. And so a lot of times being able to get those documents through your organization as quickly and efficiently as possible is really one of the things that's going to help you to be able to align with a lot of those goals that the organization has set for itself at the highest levels. Now, the third thing that we'll talk about as far as being able to have the best-in-class AP process and getting those projects approved and underway is being able to take a look at how and who it is that gets things done within your organization. So as you're thinking about a project or you're looking at, a process improvement, one of the things that we see quite frequently if you're going to actually get the project approved is being able to identify people in your organization that are successfully getting their initiatives put into action. I know I've been in a number of meetings where people have said, oh, we've wanted to do this for a long time, but now that Bob is here, Bob's somebody that has a knack for getting things approved and getting them started. And if you can find out who Bob is in your organization, they're somebody who can usually help get things pushed forward even if they've not had a lot of momentum in the past. Next thing is they're a project manager that's known for having projects that finish on time and on budget. If you've got a pool of project managers in your organization, there's probably a couple of them that are just known for being the ones that have the good work that's being done. And if you can pull one of those in onto your team, a lot of times you're going to see success. Also, do you have somebody on your team that's extraordinary at developing a vision and having teamwork together in that direction? Having that sort of good feedback and a positive committee functioning properly can go a huge distance as you're looking to getting that project underway. And finally, we talk a lot of times about that executive management sponsor and being able to have somebody that can align the project to those corporate goals that we talked about. And if you have that person on your team, even if they don't have to attend every single meeting, but there's somebody who is kind of able to act as the guidepost for you as it moves through that executive approval. This is how you can get things done, and these are the people that you want on board with you. So kind of those are some of the people that you look for if you're able to choose your team of who's going to work with you. When we talk about who it is that we see on the team from a position standpoint or from a project influence standpoint, a lot of times we are seeing more and more different groups within the organization that are showing up at these conversations. So obviously you'll have your AP management team and a supervisor or staff member that's familiar with the day-to-day processes. But we're also seeing IT staff. We're seeing finance and treasury even more so as you start to get into things like cash management and dynamic discounting. A project management person is commonly there. We're seeing people from security, so not just your standard IT staff as to how things work, but a lot of times there's even a separate security team that gets involved in the discussion. Also somebody from purchasing. And the person from purchasing typically will have kind of two hats that they're wearing. One is they're looking at the process overall from a procure-to-pay standpoint and seeing if there's things that may be taken advantage of in the actual process that's being developed. But then secondly, also making sure that the purchase that may be made is done properly. And then finally, that executive sponsor that we talked about. So if you're able to get the combination of people together, the real goal of these teams is to be able to keep things moving. If you're able to have the right people involved and you can take a step forward, that's all great. And then it's important not to take 2 steps backward, because I'm sure we've all been on committees before where it feels like you're in a meeting, and when you leave the meeting, you feel like you, instead of helping to clarify and move things in the right direction, you've actually kind of fallen behind. And so when we're talking about an evaluation that's being done by a committee, there's 2 different things that are important to talk about. And one is that committees are very helpful in evaluating solutions because you're able to bring in all of these different points of view, and everybody coming in from all those different sides of the organization have different things that they're looking to either solve or ensure when they're sitting on that committee. But as you can imagine, by having that many different people with that many diverse backgrounds and competing sometimes priorities, they can really add complexity to a decision-making process. So when we're talking about that, it's important for us to think about, what are your obstacles in getting things done, and what are your obstacles to automation? And with that, we'll go ahead and hand it back to Susie for the next poll question.
Thank you, Julie. What is your biggest obstacle to automation today? Please tick all that apply. Insufficient IT resources. Our project just never makes it onto the priority list, unfortunately. Due to multiple ERPs, we question automation's effectiveness. The AP team is resistant to change, and we can't drive improvements through. The acquisition strategy leaves little time for the business, or perhaps none of the above. So please do let us know which you should be able to tick multiple boxes here. Is it insufficient IT resources? You've got too many ERPs, which makes it difficult sometimes to see a path ahead. The AP team is resistant to change. The acquisition strategy leaves little time for the business. None of the above. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results. So just shy of 50% of you actually talking about none of the above. So it's a shame we don't have more options for you available. It would be interesting to kind of dig into what the actual obstacles are for you. Followed at 35% by those of you that say insufficient IT resources, and our project just really never makes the priority list. 8% of you talking about the AP team is resistant to change, 5% of you struggling a little bit with multiple ERPs, and 3% talking about the acquisition strategy leaving little time for the business. Back to you, please, Julie.
Excellent. Thanks. Yeah, like you had pointed out, Susie, it's very interesting that 49% are saying that, none of these are obstacles, and not sure if that means that they're not having obstacles possibly, or that there's other obstacles that might be in the way when you're looking at automating. And if people do have any comments on that, if they want to put that in the comment box, that's something that would be great, because it sounds like for a good number of people that are participating here today, maybe we're not even focusing on the right things as far as what your challenges are for automation, and we'd be happy to add things to the list or make sure that we're addressing the right things when it comes to that topic. So as far as when we're looking at making the most of the project, we're going to go back into the rest of the discussion here and talk about, the committee itself. And as you're adding complexity to that committee, sometimes we want to look at what are the elements of having that committee be as efficient in their process and in their discovery as possible, as well as helping to make sure that the committee doesn't become dysfunctional, because quite honestly, I think everybody's been involved with a dysfunctional committee at one time or another. And I was working with one organization, and literally we had the same meeting, I think 4, 5, 6 times, because every time there was a new person that was brought in, it would kind of put the whole entire discussion back to ground zero, and we would have to start all over again. And so it was frustrating and very, very expensive and time consuming. We actually at one point helped to make the point to management that they needed to get everybody involved in the room at the same time so that we could help to make these decisions, help to move things forward. And when they added it up, I think the total cost of each meeting was well over, I want to say it was $1,800 when you just looked at the salaries and the resources involved to put that meeting together, and then take that and multiply it out times the number of times that they had to meet in order to get even some of the smallest movement on that project. So kind of got us digging into some of these things. And one of those is that when you're looking at the committee and how do you help it achieve its goals, a lot of times it's important to look for things that are common goals for the entire committee. So it can have to do with looking for a solution that can be implemented across multiple ERPs. What are some options for on-demand or on-demand cloud systems, or looking at on-premise systems? Does it have to have the ability for handling all facets of inbound processing, and do all these different things need to be addressed? So that's one component of it. And as you're looking at that, some of the things that you can see from an improvement standpoint are the items that we'll talk about here in measuring your KPIs and how do you make the most of that. So as we're looking at this, the very first thing that we talk about is those KPIs and the agreement by the group that they want to be able to measure these things. So looking at your processing time, your on-time payments, your supplier discounts. Also, having the group agree that you're wanting to move more to an e-invoicing standpoint and being able to reap the benefits of not having to process those actual documents that are coming in, whether they be paper or if they're an attachment to an email. Being able to have the team be as efficient as possible and being able to have these sorts of dashboards that are showing that efficiency at any point in time. And then finally being able to maintain security. That's another thing that a lot of times is on the key thought process of people that are involved in these committees, and wanting to make sure that you have all your compliance in place, that you've got your audit trail there and can see things that happen with the document from the moment it arrives, and being able to establish your level of access for people across the organization so that you're sure that people see what they need. In addition to that, the importance of the implementation methodology comes into play. So as you're looking at these common goals that you're able to set up with the team, being able to have an implementation methodology that allows you to implement in an agile method to be able to have instant access to arrange priorities as need be, and to measure the value that you're getting from the system, along with giving feedback throughout the process, so you know when you have kind of reached the point within the process where you're maximizing your value for what the investment is going to be. Furthermore, when you look at what you've put in place and what you're setting yourself up for further improvement, this is the 5th item on that list of world-class AP. And this is being able to use the visibility that you've gained and looking at initiatives that you can take with the time that you've put in. So when you've done a project and you've been able to have some of these successful KPIs that you can now measure, and you know that you've put yourself in a good spot, a lot of times with that time that you've gained, there are some other corporate initiatives that you can now focus on so that you can go ahead and take it even to the next level. In addition, you're able to look at additional options, such as looking at things like dynamic discounting or supply chain finance. And it also might be a good time to look at other things that maybe are within the shared service model or maybe are being moved towards the shared service model. So that can include different things like purchasing, invoice processing, on the outbound invoices, or looking at sales orders which are being processed for orders that are in the organization. Another thing that comes into play a lot of times is mobility, and looking at the ability to have mobile approval is sometimes something that is a big benefit for organizations, and it's the next step in their automation process at times to be able to move it. They're not just being able to approve things from a computer, but that everybody that's out and about within your organization can get those documents in and have them approved as they're on the go, because we know that the workforce has become, really worldwide in so many ways. Along with that, looking at the purchasing process. So many organizations right now are starting to move to that full procure-to-pay model where they're trying to align the goals of the purchasing department and the accounts payable department. And being able to add purchasing processes sometimes to the accounts payable process, so it's a seamless start to finish from the point where somebody wants to raise a requisition all the way through approval, can help to make sure that you have better handle on the full spending that's being done across the organization, not just for materials for manufacture, but also to help to bring the time it takes to process that invoice down significantly, because all those invoices, or the majority of those invoices that would have been non-PO-based invoices, are now being treated like PO-based invoices, and there's something to match those up with. And that's something that has really been kind of no PO, no pay push that we've been seeing across organizations a lot in the last 6 months, I would say. In addition, one of the things that we talk about a lot of times is those additional processes. So it's always helpful to kind of see the full process from start to finish, and looking at it on this diagram on the left-hand column, we talk about order processing, then that moves on to the purchasing department, down to accounts payable, and then accounts receivable, and how your customers, your vendors, and you focus into those different processes that happen across the organization. And really being able to look to make automation across that entire spectrum is something that we're hearing more and more, and wanting to have a tool that will allow you to make those sorts of process improvements without having to go out and do a full vendor search all over again, is something that can make those committees much more efficient. As you look at those things and think about how that could play out in your organization, one of the best things that we've found for being able to help organizations kind of paint a picture of where they want to go is talking about some of the other clients that we've worked with in the past. And the first one that we're going to talk about is Maxim Integrated Products. They're a semiconductor company that has a worldwide presence with a shared service center in Asia, as well as having a presence in multiple areas here within the States and in Europe. And when they were looking for a project, the main things that they were looking at was that they had a current system, but it was a homegrown workflow, and it required every invoice to be scanned in with a barcode. It was also having some challenges with processing, and they were in the process of shifting over to a shared services model, so it made it a real challenge to try to get that workflow be visible across different areas of the organization. There was also not a standard approval hierarchy or schedules of authorizations, and in this organization, the CEO was actually approving everything that was over $1,000 purchase at the time. So you can imagine how much work that was for him on a daily basis just to do all those approvals. Next thing is that their invoices did not necessarily have a purchase order, so their percentages of PO-based invoices was rather low, and procurement and AP were not in alignment, and they were typically, having some challenges and sometimes even kind of fighting against one another at times because of the different priorities that they had. And the solution that they came up with was to work with Esker as far as their cloud-based AP solution, and it was really to allow them to have growth and usage across the globe so that they could have visibility. From a results standpoint, once they were able to put their project in place, they were able to move to an automated electronic workflow. They've been able to convert almost 100% of their customers to being able to submit documents electronically. So the percentage of actual paper documents that they're getting is really, really tiny right now. and just that one thing in and of itself has been able to help them tremendously. They've also been able to have a 95% on-time invoice payment rate, which, different organizations have different goals in this area, but for them this was a huge improvement, and it was really kind of flourished from the point of being able to have that automated workflow and the automated ability to track, who was the next person to approve, because without that matrix that was developed as part of this project, getting those things through and approved on time was very difficult. Next one that we'll talk about is ArmTech. And ArmTech, going into their project, had some drivers that were really pushing them to do a project. They had manual workflow that was causing them to have some challenges. They were having invoice volumes that fluctuated greatly across different seasons. They had no visibility to kind of the documents were in play and where they were sitting, as well as a reporting standpoint. And overall, they had a corporate focus, and that was to do some value stream mapping. And so that really brought to light some of the process challenges that they were currently having. For ArmTech, when you start to look at the results that they've had from moving to an automated system, they've been able to save 2 FTEs as far as time goes during their work days. They've been able to increase their processing speed by 50%. So from that standpoint, anything that had been taking 10 days to send out and get approvals and process through is now down to 5. So if you can imagine the amount of savings that would give you for not having to track where all those documents are at any given time. In addition, they've been able to increase their productivity and eliminate their backlog. They've been able to reduce any temporary staff that they were hiring. Their error rate was decreased, as well as the fact that they're now able to generate payment proposals in 1 to 1.5 hours. That process in and of itself had previously taken 1 to 2 days. So one of the things that we had from a quote from ArmTech was that they don't have any regrets, and if anything, they only wish that they would have used Esker sooner. So it really is a great testimonial to the results that they've been able to get once they were able to put these automation pieces into place. A few other things that we're hearing from clients, and these are just some other quotes that we've had from customers that have implemented AP processes. The group at Mostyn made the comment that the small investment it was to get Esker in place seemed like a no-brainer. It was completely electronic, and the benefits flowed from there. The group down at Albemarle was able to state that they had full OCR and the ability to post invoices to SAP and see them with 100% visibility, which has had a significant impact on the company's overall success. And that's another organization that's had some heavy shifting of work that's been moved to their shared services center. The Vodafone folks had commented that a deciding factor in the decision was, for one thing, the solution to meet their technical requirements, but also the price-performance ratio had been right in that Esker has convinced them on all respects, so that we've been able to not only come in with a good price, but that they've had significant improvements from those processes. Just up here, just a couple quick things. Esker, as an organization, has a worldwide footprint, and it's helpful to know that there's 10 offices and over 350 employees around the world. So even in organizations where the headquarters may be on one continent and the shared service center on another, we have teams of people that can work together with you so that you can have a personal contact on all fronts. We've got a large customer base that we work with over 11,000 active document automation customers worldwide, and we're processing over 20 million documents each month. And we were one of the first organizations to have a SaaS model out there, and it's actually been in place for many, many years. And the cloud model came to be for Esker by actually Microsoft approaching us and asking about a cloud platform for them to utilize. One other note is that we work with any ERP, and we do work with multiple ERPs as well. And I don't think it was a real high item as far as a lot of the people go on the call today, but anytime you have an acquisition, there's always a possibility that you might start to have multiple ERPs that you need to manage the process of. And having visibility across those ERPs from a single point of reporting and visibility from a dashboard perspective can really help the accounts payable teams and management to be able to process documents and report on documents that otherwise would be siloed in those separate ERPs. With that, I want to go ahead and hand it back to Susie should there be any questions, and be able to just kind of list here the contact information. And so we'll have just a few minutes for questions and answers before we wrap this up.
That's great, Julie. Many thanks indeed. So let's kick off with our first question that's come through, which I'm just going to cast your mind back to step one, Julie, when we were talking about costs and the cost to process an invoice. And you shared a stat, which I think you work with PayStream advisors on. And the stat was the average price per invoice in 2015, according to this report, was about just over $40, and the best-in-class price per invoice was just shy of $3. The question is, could you just let us know what's included within the cost, what items and activities are included within the cost there, and does it include any purchase order activity?
Sure. When we're doing this and we're getting these numbers from the different studies that have been done, what is asked of clients is to ask about what is the total purchase cost. And I think when we're talking about what is the total purchase cost, everybody may interpret that a little bit different. I'm sorry, not the total purchase cost, the total invoice cost. Everybody may interpret that a little bit different. And we do encourage, and I know PayStream advisors as a whole encourages organizations to really look at what is the total cost of paying that invoice. In an organization where they do have a true procure-to-pay organization, I could see where they may have included that purchase requisition process in it, because of the fact that really it's the opposite of the approval process on the back end once the invoices come in for approval. As a rule, when they were looking at it and asking the question for the study that was being done in and of itself, know how much detail was captured in that study, about, did you include the purchase requisition process or not? I know it's a document that PayStream published and that's out there. I think it's on their website and available for them, to download. And you might have to be a member of their group, but it's something that they've published. And so I would say that I would expect that for most organizations it probably wasn't included, but that's not to say that some organizations maybe did include that in their process when they were looking at total cost.
Okay, good. And from that kind of the activity perspective, is it your opinion that people are generally including kind of headcount and staff, maybe with a bit of uplift, and maybe enabling technologies that pertain specifically to accounts payable, but they're not including like overheads and they're not including a slice of the ERP costs?
Yeah, I think the thing that we see most frequently that isn't included is what happens once you send it out for approval, and how much does it cost, all those people on the approval hierarchy to do whatever it is that they need to do in order to get that process moved to the next step. So a lot of times when we're talking to an accounts payable group, they may have done a great job of capturing everything that happens within the accounts payable function, but they might not have reached out to that approver to see, okay, when you get an invoice and there is a discrepancy on it, what are your steps and how do you talk to the vendors, or how do you go, talk to the receiving team and get that so you can get that document processed back to the AP staff. And that seems to be the biggest kind of area that sometimes doesn't get included, as well as anything where the accounts payable team is taking care of it, but it's not something that's necessarily within the ERP. Sometimes it gets minimized if it's something that's being done, via email workflow instead of something that's being done within the actual processing system.
Okay, good. Another question from another viewer around accuracy. So, and I'm understanding this is very much to do with data capture technologies. What are the kind of the recommendations that you would make to a user just to make sure that the data capture rates are as high as they can be? And also, imagine that technology in this field is advancing very rapidly. What kind of data capture rates per invoice can users generally look to expect?
Yeah, as you're looking at it, it's interesting because we're seeing more and more organizations shifting from, getting a lot of paper-based documents that are still coming in the postal mail to getting attached PDFs that are being emailed in. And if you're getting in emails that have, they're readable PDFs, so if you highlight a document, an area in it, you can copy the text out of it. If you're able to get a lot of your invoices in as readable PDFs, you can pretty reliably get 100% data capture on those, at least with our solution, because then you're no longer having to rely on OCR. If you're talking about the OCR technology, it's definitely come a huge way in the last few years. And having OCR that can do capture from an optical character recognition standpoint, so it's an image-based PDF or it's a piece of paper that's being scanned, is an important component of it. And right now, when you do scanning from an OCR standpoint, we're seeing capture rates that are up, in the upper 90 percentile for that. And the important thing about it in any automated process is not just that you're scanning that document and that you're getting good capture of the text that's on there, but the intelligence that's built into it after that document has had the optical character recognition take place, so that you can have the intelligent workload being handled primarily by the system as far as looking at doing some matching for you against your POs, making sure that you're finding the right vendor, so that a lot of that work that was being done manually by the AP team can now be done by the system, and leave the AP staff to be able to kind of do the work that is more of auditing perspective or analyst perspective, and be able to kind of pass that up the value chain for what that staff is providing.
Great, Julie. We've got a few more questions. I'll try and get through most of them if we can. We've only got 4 minutes left of this session. A comment from one of our viewers, which I'm hoping he's okay if I share, regarding cost per invoice. This particular viewer, they're seeing it coming in at $3.02 per transaction, and for them it includes the entire AP department cost, including management and the facility, and IT stroke imaging allocations, but not including purchasing, and also not including the approver's time to approve or code. And I think as well that that's something that a lot of companies struggle to do, is to capture the time it takes for an approver to actually approve and code an invoice. Okay, let's move on to a question that was more of a comment. So if you can respond to this relatively concisely, so I can maybe see if we can get the other questions answered. How do you actually completely eliminate paper invoices?
Completely eliminating paper invoices is something that a lot of organizations strive for. I would say that most organizations can get down into the low percentages, and when I say low, I mean less than probably 3 to 5% being paper-based, just by reaching out to vendors in order to see if they have the ability to send in invoices via electronic submission, even if it's just an email attachment, because that can send it directly into the processing chain. But getting them completely out of paper-based is something that I would say is a rarity, but with the caveat that you can have a scanning partner that can do that for you, so that you personally can get out of the paper invoice business if that's something that's a goal.
Okay, good. Questions come in around operating with a particular ERP system, and I don't know if I'm misreading it, but it's this particular viewer is using ERP LN, L for LN. Do you have an installation using LN ERP systems? I mean, you say that your technology is ERP agnostic, so I'm assuming it doesn't matter what the ERP or accounting system is. You guys can work with it.
Correct. Yeah, and I think LN is also BON is the other way that people have referred to it in the past. And that is one that we've worked with before, and you're correct. We can work with any of the systems that are out there and even work with multiple systems at the same time. So for example, some organizations have multiple, even just SAP instances, but they have more than one, or they might have SAP and Oracle and BON is, you know, something we come across, and that's a landscape that makes it difficult for some organizations, but the way that our technology lays out, we can work with those.
Okay, good. Julie May, thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid we are out of time. If you would like to contact Julie for further information, her contact details are made available on the slide in front of you. Please do make sure that you join us for as many of the upcoming webinars that we've got in our webinar series. We've got a packed schedule for you on the webinar front, and I'm sure there are many that will appeal to you. Also, we've got a number of conferences coming up. Again, if you're stateside, you might want to join us at the North American Global Process Owners Summit. Do get in contact if you would like to and express an interest in coming to that. That's taking place in May in Seattle. We also have the P2P Leader Summit taking place in London in June. Many thanks for your time and attention. We will be sharing these slides. We look forward to welcoming you next time. Thank you and goodbye.